At 8:13, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights has a special exhibit on right now you can go and view. It's called Our Canada, My Story. It is, in fact, 7 personal stories to mark Canada 150. Kevin Takahide Lee's story is featured in the exhibit. He's of Japanese and Chinese descent. He's also a professional tenor with the Vancouver Opera. He is in Winnipeg to speak this afternoon to students about, among other things, his BC choir for Canadian newcomers.
About 4 years ago, I started the Newcomers Choir, and since then it's grown from 5 people to 35 people. And it's a choir that I wanted to act as a bridge with cultural divides, generational divides. For me, music is powerful because it is a connecting force. It brings people together. I enjoy helping out in the areas that I feel very proud. And that relates to my grandparents.
That's Kevin Takahide Lee. He's mentioned, he is in Winnipeg today as part of a human library event that's happening this afternoon at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. But first, he's in studio with us. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
I'm sorry it's raining.
You know, it's a reminder of home. Vancouver and the Lower Mainland is very rainy right now.
We gave you some sunshine yesterday when you got to the city. You mentioned in that clip that your grandparents were part of the motivation for the Newcomers Choir, and I watched a lot of your story in some special video coverage online, and you talk about them a lot, being really informing a lot of the ways that you walk in the world in Canada. Yeah. What happened to them? They both were born here in Canada. I'm 4th generation, so my family's for an East Asian family has been here for a very long time. And when they were young, they were taken from their homes with their families and put into internment camps in the interior. The process was against Geneva Conventions because they had to pay for their imprisonment. And so when they eventually came out of the internment camps, which for my grandparents was actually after World War II, they came out of the internment camps in 1946. And they had to start from scratch. And that's just one story. I'm not a representative of the entire Japanese-Canadian community. There are so many stories out there, and even within my family, my grandparents, they did come back eventually to the Lower Mainland. But for my grandfather's siblings, they all went to Toronto. And for my grandmother's siblings and family, they went to Japan, some of them for the first time. So it was repatriation for some, but it was also exile for others. In your whole story when you were telling it, and I talked about the documentary that I watched, one thing keeps sticking with me. It's this image of you saying your grandmother was put into a livestock barn.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't think about your grandparents. You think about the special place that those of us that are, have been lucky enough to have grandparents in our lives. I mean, did they talk about their experience?
Absolutely not. It was, if they ever did talk about it, it was a little short anecdote that quickly ended. But just to give an example, imagine yourself as a child and you're going to the fair. And it's such a happy experience for kids. You go on rides, you see animals, you eat those mini donuts that make you sick. It's a wonderful time. However, when I went with my grandmother, she would never go into that livestock barn. And I didn't know why when I was a child. So I would be asking my grandmother, trying to pull her into the barn to see the other animals, but she emotionally and physically could not go on that journey with me. So for the longest time, I didn't know why until I grew up and learned more about my own family history.
What's it like finding your own Canadian pride, given your family's dark history in this country? I think this question's critical to so many people.
That's a great question. And finding Canadian pride is correcting the wrongs that have been done to other people. The Japanese-Canadian story, it is a unique story, but by no means is it the only story. It just during the internment camp time, the Dugabors were also interned as well, and they were a great asset to my family. They were good friends, they were great neighbors, they were a huge help. But even looking throughout Canada,
the aspect of truth and reconciliation, which is something holds very dear to me, and I also know to my family. Those are issues that we also need to face as a country, and it's not pretty. But in order for us to progress and get beyond this, we have to talk about it. I was on the 2013 youth panel for Truth and Reconciliation Week in Vancouver, and just being part of that panel and seeing that week and seeing the stories told and the wounds that we're starting to heal, that's a part of the process, and that's what makes me proud to be a Canadian now. Because growing up back in, how old am I now? Growing up in the 80s and 90s, in school, these subjects were barely touched on.
They weren't. I know. I'm around the same age as you, the 80s and 90s when you grew up.
Yeah, and it just really, it really is quite incredible to see the changes that are happening. And I know even for my great aunt, who's 93 now and still in great health, and who's also shown in the video, she is so proud and surprised that this is happening now.
So let me ask you, because you also mentioned something called, it's a concept in Japanese, Shigato Jini. Am I saying it close?
Shigata Ganai.
Shigato Ganai. I'm not saying it close at all. I do know, I hope I'm right with this, that it means it can't be helped.
Yes.
And you say that helped your grandparents survive.
Yeah.
Some people would say it can be helped. We have to look at this differently. As you know, where's the sort of room for reconciliation and acknowledgement living together in our country?
You know, that's a really good point. Shigata Ganai, it helped my grandparents, and I would even say my mom get through the racism, and wait for the better time when it was right. However, Shigata Ganai, because that mentality was so prevalent in the Japanese Canadian community, it almost prevented us getting us/them the reparations, just because people were saying, oh, they're willing to offer this one, so let's just go for it and put it all behind us. But luckily, for some individuals, they really fought for it. And one of the individuals will actually be here today in Winnipeg on panel with me, Art Mickey. He's incredible. Yeah, incredible person.
He's been a judge here. We've done lots of stories with Art Mickey when he's been swearing people in to become new Manitobans.
Wow.
What's it going to be like for you this afternoon? You're on a panel. You're going to see I Understand Your Family Story in the museum for the first time.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think I'm going to be slightly overwhelmed. I brought a little box of tissues with me just in case if I need it. We'll see. I'm exceptionally excited. I find it's always important to communicate and engage youth. Just because they are the future. I know it's a cliche saying, but literally they are. They will be choice makers. They will be the people who will be getting jobs that will affect other people. It's a cascade effect.
Enjoy your time in Winnipeg. Thank you so much for giving us some time on CBC this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Nice to meet you. That's Kevin Takahide Lee. This event this afternoon involves students from grades 9 to 12. But you can see the exhibit, Our Canada, My Story, on now and running through, of course, Canada Day and longer at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights.